My name is Daniel Mercer, and I was never supposed to take the night shift at Holloway Tower. People say the building is just another abandoned office block, but that's a lie. My partner, Luis Ortega, lasted only 2 nights before he quit without a word. The 3rd night, I came in alone. And that's when I learned why he ran. Because something lives inside this place, and it doesn't want guards. It wants replacements. The first night of the job felt heavier than I expected. The building loomed against the night sky like a black tower, 10 stories of steel and glass standing far from the main road. From the outside, it already seemed abandoned, though I knew companies still rented office space here. The parking lot was empty except for my car, and as I locked the doors behind me, the silence wrapped around me like a blanket too tight to breathe through. The only sound was the low hum of the street lamp buzzing near the entrance. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. It wasn't the sharp bite of air conditioning, but something stale and heavy, as if the place hadn't been touched by sunlight in years. The lobby stretched wide, its marble floors reflecting the faint glow of security lights. My footsteps echoed as I crossed to the desk, each sound bouncing back too loud, too sharp, like I was intruding. The security control room was tucked away behind the reception area. It was a cramped little space filled with monitors stacked in rows, their screens glowing faint blue. Most of them showed empty hallways, stairwells, and offices. For the first hour, I sat there staring, telling myself it would be an easy job. Just watch the cameras, walk the halls every so often, and clock out in the morning. But my chest felt tight. My skin prickled, and I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. Around 2 in the morning, I decided to do my first patrol. I carried a flashlight, though the building had dim emergency lights along the walls. As I stepped into the hallway, the silence deepened. Every sound I made seemed wrong. My breathing felt too loud, the creak of my shoes against the floor too sharp. The offices on either side were locked and dark, their glass doors reflecting my flashlight beam like mirrors. Every reflection made me pause, as though something might shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I walked through the first 3 floors slowly, checking doors, peering into stairwells. Nothing. By the time I reached the 5th floor, I had almost convinced myself it was all in my head. Maybe the building just felt strange because it was so empty at night. Maybe I was just tired. But when I returned to the control room, something changed. One of the monitors showed movement. I froze in the doorway, staring. The camera for the lobby flickered with static, and when the picture cleared, I saw it. A figure, tall, thin, just standing there in the middle of the marble floor. It didn't move, didn't shift, didn't breathe. Its shape was darker than the shadows around it, but not detailed enough for me to see a face. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed the flashlight and ran down the stairs, forcing myself not to stop until I hit the lobby. The space stretched empty before me, the floor shining clean. The glass doors reflected nothing but my own pale face. There was no one there. I turned slowly in a circle, scanning every corner. Nothing. No doors had opened, no windows broken, no sound at all except the ringing in my ears. After a minute, I told myself it must have been a glitch. Cameras glitch. Static happens. Maybe a trick of the light. That's what I tried to believe as I walked back upstairs. But when I sat down in front of the monitors again, my stomach dropped. The figure was gone from the lobby camera, but something else had appeared. The marble floor glistened faintly, but not from its usual polish. There were footprints. Wet, dark prints, shaped like bare feet, trailing across the floor exactly where the figure had been standing. The worst part was that the prints were fresh. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the faint shine of moisture. One step, then another. They didn't lead toward the door. They led deeper into the building, toward the hallway that connected to the stairwell. I sat frozen in my chair, listening. The building was silent, but in that silence I swore I could hear something faint. A soft echo of dripping water, like footsteps moving slowly away, leaving wet marks behind that I could not see in front of me, but only through the glassy eyes of the cameras. That was when I realized I wasn't just watching the building was watching me, and somewhere inside something had already moved in. The second night I walked into the building, I felt a pull in my gut that told me to turn back. The place looked even darker than before, as though it had swallowed all the light around it. The air was heavy, still carrying that stale, untouched scent that clung to my skin long after I left. I told myself I just needed to get through another shift, another paycheck. But the thought of walking those halls again already made my stomach twist. The control room was waiting for me like a cage. The monitors hummed softly, their faint glow flickering on my face as I sat down. At first, everything looked normal. Empty offices, stairwells, and hallways. Too normal, in fact. I remembered the footprints from the first night, the way they had appeared fresh on the marble floor and led into darkness. I glanced at the lobby camera again, half expecting to see them return, but the lobby was clean. For a while, I almost let myself believe nothing strange would happen. It was around 1 in the morning when I noticed it. The stairwell camera, grainy but steady, showed something strange. The door on the 7th floor was wide open. I knew for certain it had been locked earlier when I walked past it during my patrol. The company was clear. Stairwells must stay locked for safety reasons. Yet there it was, yawning open into blackness. I didn't want to go, but ignoring it wasn't an option. If something went wrong and I hadn't checked, I'd be held responsible. So I picked up my flashlight and stepped out into the hall, forcing my feet toward the stairs. The closer I got, the colder the air became. The hallway felt longer than usual, each step dragging heavier than the last. When I pushed the stairwell door open, I immediately knew something was wrong. The lights that should have been glowing faintly overhead were off. All I saw was a deep shaft of shadow stretching upward, the faint smell of damp concrete floating through the air. I aimed my flashlight up the stairwell, and that's when I saw them. Handprints. Dark smudges smeared along the wall, uneven, as if something had dragged itself upward. I climbed slowly, my flashlight beam shaking in my trembling hand. The handprints continued up, one after another, growing messier, as though whatever had made them was struggling or rushing. My heartbeat quickened. I told myself it was vandals, maybe squatters, maybe kids playing some prank. Anything but what I felt pressing in around me. Halfway to the 8th floor, I stopped. A sound froze me in place. Breathing. Soft, wet, ragged breathing that echoed faintly through the concrete stairwell. It was coming from above. I tilted the flashlight upward, expecting to catch someone standing there, but the stairs twisted around into shadow. The sound continued, steady, slow, too deliberate to be the building creaking. It wasn't my imagination. Someone, or something, was up there. I felt my knees weaken, but I forced myself to take one more step, then another. My foot pressed against the concrete, and the breathing stopped. The silence that followed was worse. My ears strained for the sound to return, but all I heard was my own pulse hammering. Then came a faint shuffle, just one step, like something moving slightly out of reach. That was enough. I turned and hurried back down, refusing to look over my shoulder in case something was there. My hand fumbled with the door handle, and when I burst into the hallway again, the air felt lighter, though my chest was still tight with fear. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, trying to steady myself. Back in the control room, I sank into the chair and stared at the stairwell camera again. The screen flickered, static crawling across the image. Then it cleared. My blood ran cold. At the bottom of the stairwell, right against the camera's angle, something pale crouched. I couldn't make out details. Its shape was wrong, its limbs too long, but I knew it was staring straight at the lens, unmoving, watching. I sat frozen in my chair, staring back at that pale outline, unable to blink, unable to breathe. And then, without warning, the feed cut to static again. But even through the hiss of the monitors, I swore I could still hear the sound of breathing. This time, It wasn't coming from the screen. It was coming from somewhere inside the building, closer than before. By the third night, the building already felt like it was swallowing me whole. I pulled into the empty parking lot with my chest tight and my stomach sour, wishing for any sign of life, even a single car that wasn't mine. But there was nothing. Just a vast lot of cracked concrete and shadows that stretched endlessly under a half-dead street lamp. Every part of me wanted to turn the key, drive away, and never come back. But I couldn't. Money was short, and quitting wasn't an option. So I forced myself inside, through those heavy glass doors that shut behind me with a hollow thud, like a coffin closing. The air was colder than ever. It wrapped around me like damp cloth, sinking into my bones. The lobby was spotless, too clean, as though it were prepared every night for someone who never arrived. My footsteps echoed as I walked past the marble floors. But what disturbed me was how each echo seemed to lag, repeating itself too many times, as if the building were mimicking me. In the control room, the monitors glowed faintly, throwing a pale blue light across the walls. I stared at them for nearly an hour, every tick of the clock dragging slower than it should. My eyes moved across the feeds, empty hallways, lifeless stairwells, locked offices. Nothing stirred, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed one camera flicker, a long hallway on the 6th floor. The light at the end began to stutter, blinking in and out like a dying bulb. At first it was slow, but then the flickering sped up until finally the entire stretch of lights went out. I told myself I would just check it, quick and simple. With my flashlight clutched in a sweaty grip, I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 6th floor. The ride up felt endless, the hum of the machinery surrounding me like a low growl. When the doors slid open, darkness greeted me. The emergency lights were dead, the entire hallway swallowed in shadow. I stepped forward cautiously, the beam of my flashlight trembling against the walls. That's when I saw it. The plaster wasn't smooth anymore. Deep scratches ran along the walls, jagged and uneven, as though claws had been dragged through them. My light followed the marks down the corridor, where they became worse. Symbols, crooked and twisted, carved into the plaster in long rows. They meant nothing to me, but looking at them made my head ache, as though they carried a sound I couldn't hear. The silence pressed in so thick, I thought I might choke. Every step forward echoed too long, as if the hallway were stretching behind me. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, that panic was warping my sense of space. But the exit at the far end didn't get closer no matter how many steps I took. I felt trapped inside a loop, walking forward without moving at all. Then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, perfectly in rhythm with mine. I froze instantly. The sound stopped, too. My chest rose and fell, ragged, my ears ringing. I took another step forward, my shoe scraping the floor. The footsteps echoed back, matching me exactly. It wasn't an echo. It was delayed, deliberate. Something was walking behind me, following me step for step. I turned sharply, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The hallway stretched behind me, impossibly long, scratched walls glinting under the light. But nothing stood there, only the silence. I swallowed hard and spun back toward the exit, forcing my legs to move faster, almost a run. Finally, as if the building released me, I reached the end of the hallway and shoved open the exit door. I stumbled into the stairwell, the air rushing in like relief. My whole body shook as I forced myself back down to the control room. When I collapsed into the chair, my flashlight still trembling in my hand, I noticed something. Scratches. They weren't on the wall this time. They were on my flashlight itself. The same crooked symbols I had seen carved into the hallway were now etched deep into the plastic, though I had never let go of it. I ran my fingers across them and the grooves felt fresh, as if carved only moments ago. I stared at those marks, my stomach twisting tighter with each breath, and I couldn't stop the thought repeating in my mind. The building hadn't just wanted me to see those symbols. It wanted to bring them back with me. And now, they were here, in my hands. Proof that whatever I had walked through wasn't just a trick of the dark. It had touched me. It had left something behind. By the fourth night, I felt more like a prisoner than a guard. Every hour in that building drained something from me, as if the walls themselves were feeding on my nerves. I walked through the front doors with my flashlight clutched tight, fighting the urge to turn back. I had barely slept since the last shift, replaying those scratches over and over in my mind, the way they had burned themselves into my flashlight like some kind of warning I couldn't understand. The control room felt no safer than the rest of the place. The monitors flickered faintly, showing the same endless angles of empty hallways and locked doors. I sat there for what felt like hours, too afraid to patrol but too restless to sit still. That was when one of the screens pulled me in. The feed from the 8th floor showed movement. The office at the far end of the hall, the one marked as permanently locked, had a shadow flickering inside. At first, I thought it was just the lights stuttering again, but the office didn't have lights on. The dark inside shifted as if something was pacing back and forth behind the glass. I leaned closer, my skin prickling. The camera shook slightly, then steadied, and I saw the handle of the office door move. It twisted slowly, back and forth, as though someone inside was testing it. I froze, staring, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. The handle turned again, then rattled harder, like whoever or whatever was in there was growing impatient. I didn't want to go. Every part of me screamed not to. But if someone had broken in, if there was a trespasser, it was my job to deal with it. That's what I kept telling myself as I grabbed the flashlight and headed for the stairs. My legs felt like stone, heavy and reluctant, dragging me upward against my will. The 8th floor was silent, the air colder than anywhere else in the building. My breath came out in faint clouds, and the smell of dust and damp hung thick in my nose. The hallway stretched out ahead, lined with dark glass doors reflecting my beam of light. At the very end stood the locked office. The handle gleamed faintly in the dark. I crept closer, each step echoing off the walls. When I reached the door, I saw it was sealed tight, exactly as it should be. I tested it carefully. The lock held. Relief washed over me for a moment, until I heard it. A sound from the other side. It was faint, rhythmic. A tapping noise, steady and deliberate, as if fingers were drumming lightly on a desk inside. I froze, pressing my ear closer to the wood. The tapping grew louder, quicker, as though whoever was doing it knew I was there. Then it changed. The taps dragged into scratches, long, slow scrapes of fingernails clawing against the wood. I stumbled back, my flashlight shaking, the sound following me even though I was no longer pressed against the door. The scratching felt alive, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. My stomach turned cold, my hands clammy. Then, as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Silence crashed over me. I stood there, trembling, staring at the locked door. My mind screamed to leave, but something made me reach forward again, almost against my will. My hand brushed the handle. It was wet. I pulled away quickly, my palm glistening in the weak beam of the flashlight. At first I thought it was water, but when I looked closer, my stomach dropped. It was thick, sticky, dark red. My knees nearly gave out. I stumbled back, gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt, and turned to run. My footsteps thundered down the hall, my breath ragged in my ears. When I burst into the stairwell, I forced myself down the steps 2 at a time, not daring to look back until I was safe in the control room again. When I finally sat down, shaking, I turned to the monitors out of instinct. My blood turned to ice. The office door was wide open. On the feed, the room inside was no longer dark. A dim, sickly glow spilled out across the floor, and sitting at the desk was a figure. It wasn't blurred. It wasn't a trick of the static. The figure sat perfectly still, hands folded on the desk, its face hidden in shadow. And yet, Even through the grainy black and white of the camera, I knew it was staring straight into the lens. I leaned closer without realizing it, drawn in against my will. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there in that locked room that was no longer locked. I forced myself to look away, but the image burned in my mind. Something was in that office, something that had never been meant to leave. And now, it knew I was watching. By the fifth night, I felt hollowed out. My skin was pale, my eyes sunken, and every hour away from the building was filled with dread for when I'd have to return. I didn't sleep anymore. I only stared at the ceiling in my small apartment, listening for sounds that weren't there, waiting for the next shift, like a man walking to his own execution. But still, I drove back. Still, I walked into that place. The paycheck wasn't the reason anymore. It was something else. I felt tied to the building, like leaving it behind wasn't even possible. The doors closed behind me with a dull echo, and the silence was worse than ever. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of something listening. The lobby gleamed with that same marble shine, but the air was heavier, damper, as if the walls themselves were rotting. I hurried past, clutching my flashlight as if it could protect me, and entered the control room. The monitors greeted me with static. One after another flickered, distorted images pulsing across the screens. For a moment I thought they were broken, but then the static cleared, and what I saw made my heart stop. Some of the feeds showed places that didn't exist. Hallways that were too long, twisting at impossible angles. Doors that had never been there before. Others showed things worse than empty corridors. They showed me. On one screen, I was walking down the fourth-floor hallway, my flashlight cutting through the dark. On another, I was standing in the stairwell, staring up into the shadows. On yet another, I was sitting right there in the control room, watching the screens. My throat tightened. My hands shook. I was watching myself in places I had never been. I leaned closer, desperate to find some mistake, some explanation. That was when one feed pulled me in. It showed the control room itself, the very chair where I sat. I saw my own back, my own shoulders hunched and trembling, but in the reflection of the monitor in front of me, something else appeared. A figure standing behind me. I spun in my chair so fast it nearly toppled, the flashlight beam jerking wildly across the room. Nothing. Just empty walls and humming machines. My breath came fast and shallow, but when I looked back at the screen, the figure was still there, behind the other me, watching. I couldn't take it anymore. I jumped up and grabbed my keys. I had to get out. I didn't care if I lost the job. I didn't care about anything except escaping. I ran through the hallways, my footsteps echoing far too loud, and reached the front doors. I shoved the key into the lock, twisted hard, pulled with all my strength. Nothing. The doors rattled against their chains, but they didn't open. I twisted again, until the metal groaned in protest, but it was useless. It was as if the building itself had sealed me inside. Panic clawed up my throat. I turned and ran back toward the control room, thinking maybe there was another way out, maybe a back exit I hadn't noticed. But when I stumbled through the doorway, every monitor had changed. No longer showing hallways, stairwells, or offices. They all showed the same thing. Me. Dozens of me, sitting in the same chair, in the same room, staring into the screens with wide, terrified eyes. My stomach lurched as I leaned closer. Each version of me looked slightly different. Paler, darker, older, younger, but all of them locked in the same position. And then, slowly, one of them moved. It was subtle at first, a tilt of the head, the faint twitch of lips. Then, unmistakably, that version of me turned its face toward the camera and smiled. The expression was wrong, stretched too wide, the teeth too sharp. My whole body went cold. I tried to pull away, but my legs wouldn't move. The lights in the control room flickered, the machines groaning. My flashlight sputtered and died. Darkness swallowed everything, leaving only the faint glow of the monitors. One by one, the other versions of me on the screens began to smile, too. their grins spreading wider, their eyes darker. That was the last thing I remember. They told me later the building was empty when the morning shift arrived. No trace of me, no keys, no flashlight, nothing at all. The control room was cold, the monitors dark. But one of them, they said, still glowed faintly. Its glass was cracked, its screen warped, but an image was burned into it. A figure sat in the chair, hunched forward, staring at the monitor. It looked almost like me, but not quite. Its face was stretched, its eyes black, its grin frozen wide. The building had taken me. Or maybe it had replaced me. Either way, I never left. And if someone new takes the night shift, maybe they'll see me too, smiling from the other side of the screen.